I never thought that Karen could intrude into my private space without asking, without negotiating. She simply assumed the right to do whatever she wanted. Things began to escalate when I discovered a series of villas being built right on my land, which I had no knowledge of. Welcome to Karen Karma. Have you ever encountered a HOA, Karen? Share your story in the comments below. The neighborhood where I live is quiet, situated on a tree-lined street where everyone lives in harmony. The houses are built in a consistent, simple style, yet full of warmth. The air here is fresh, with no noise, no crowding. The neighbors are close friends, all respectful of each other. It is an ideal place to enjoy peace in the later years of life. I am an independent person who dislikes arguments or conflict. I have lived my entire life in this place. This land is not just where I live, but also a family asset that we have built over many years. The memories of my grandparents and parents are tied to this land. We've lived here for so many years without any problems. But then one day, a big change came, and it all started with Karen, the president of the HOA. One morning, like any other morning, I was sitting on my porch, enjoying a hot cup of coffee and admiring my favorite garden. The fresh, peaceful air made me feel relaxed. But suddenly, my phone rang, shattering the silence. It was a neighbor, her voice full of concern. Karen is building a massive villa complex right on your land. They've already started construction. I couldn't believe my ears. How could this happen? Karen, the HOA president, could do this without informing me, without asking for my approval? That land is not only mine, but also a precious part of my family's history, filled with memories of my grandparents and parents. Unable to wait any longer, I quickly drove to my property. When I arrived, the scene before me left me stunned. Workers were bustling around like a swarm of bees, machinery roaring, and the land that I had nurtured for so many years was now a chaotic construction site. A massive villa complex was slowly taking shape right in the middle of my property with no permission from me. Warning signs, tall concrete walls, construction materials, and strange structures made me dizzy. It felt like an invasion, an appropriation of my property without notice or any negotiation. Rage surged inside me like a violent wave. I saw Karen standing in the middle of the construction site, looking smug, as if she was carrying out a completely reasonable task. She looked at me, her eyes shining with confidence, as if I couldn't do anything about it. The feeling of being violated, of having my family's rights taken away, made it impossible for me to stand still. I walked quickly toward her, unable to contain the anger building inside me. I shouted loudly, unable to hold back. Selena, what are you doing on my land? Why didn't you ask for my permission before starting this project? Karen, calmly smirking. Oh, I just thought this would be a great project for the neighborhood. I'm sure you don't mind, do you? I, frustrated, my voice shaking with anger. This is my family's property, Selena. You don't have the right to do this without my consent. You can't just invade my rights like this. Karen looked at me with an arrogant expression, her eyes gleaming with self-satisfaction, as if she had done something entirely reasonable and I had no right to oppose it. She shrugged and sneered, as if it didn't matter at all. Karen, looking at me with disdain, you can sue me if you want, but don't forget that I have the HO's approval. You can't do anything, right? Karen's words hit me like a cold splash of water to the face. I felt like I was being disrespected, stripped of the rights I had protected for so many years. She seemed like someone who didn't care about the principles and values I cherished. I couldn't let this go. This land wasn't something she could do whatever she wanted with. I decided to take action. If not now, who knows what Karen will do next, and whether she'll continue to trample on my rights without facing any consequences. My heart burned like fire, but I knew that only decisive and strong actions could protect what I had cherished my entire life. I could no longer sit still. Each day, each hour that passed, the illegal resort that Karen was building on my land made me feel more insulted than ever. Those grand villas, those shimmering pools, not only encroached on my space, but also directly challenged me. Just thinking about how she had taken over the land that I had tended for so many years without a word or a request made my blood boil. Karen was not only a selfish neighbor, but also an abuser of her power, trampling over others. And I, someone who had lived on this land for years, could not let this tyranny continue. A plan formed clearly and resolutely in my mind. If I did not act now, she would continue encroaching. And if I did nothing, Karen would think she had won, that my rights were not worth defending. I could not allow myself to become a loser in my own home. I needed to do something powerful, an action no one could ignore. And I came up with a way. She would never suspect that the very project she thought was complete would be utterly destroyed. I wanted Karen to face the consequences of her actions, not just to protect my rights, but to make her understand that no one could outsmart me. I called the only friend I could trust at this moment, Alex. Alex was a skilled worker, someone who had helped me with many tasks before. When he arrived, I didn't say much, just pointed out what needed to be done, and my gaze was as firm as steel. I, in a determined voice, dig this hole deep. Don't let her think she's won. When the project is nearly finished, we'll activate it. Everything will be destroyed in the blink of an eye. And I want Karen to pay for what she has done. Alex looked at me with suspicion, his face showing some concern, but in his eyes, I saw understanding. He knew that if we didn't act, the consequences would be much worse. Alex, surprised but agreeing. Are you really going to do that? Dig a hole, destroy the whole project? We could find another way, maybe sue or negotiate. I looked at him, my eyes unwavering. I had made up my mind. There was no turning back. I, firmly, with conviction, if we do nothing, she will continue to encroach. No one can just invade my property without paying the price. At this point, I have no other choice. I'm tired of Karen's deceit. Does she think she can do whatever she wants without facing consequences? If I don't act, she will continue her way, and I'll be the one who loses in the end. Alex said nothing more, just silently nodded. He wasn't unaware, but I knew this action would not be easy. We began preparing the tools, the picks, shovels, and the necessary equipment to dig the hole. The atmosphere was tense, like a storm was about to hit, just waiting for a strong gust of wind to sweep everything away. With each strike of the pick into the ground, I felt like I was reclaiming my rights. Each layer of earth dug up felt like I was clearing away the mess that Karen had created. I wasn't just digging a hole. I was digging into the very dignity of myself. Every time the shovel hit the earth, it felt like I was fighting to protect fairness, to protect what I had cherished for so many years. Alex occasionally stopped, looked at me, and then continued working. He didn't ask anything more, just silently followed the plan. Both of us continued working in silence, like shadows silently resisting an invading force. The hole had been dug deep and wide enough to destroy everything Karen had created. The earth beneath my feet, each layer of soil, seemed to give me new strength. This hole was not just destruction. It was a warning, a reminder that my rights could not be taken lightly. When everything was ready, I stood looking at the deep hole in front of me. The air felt heavier than ever, but I knew there was no other choice. Karen would have to pay for her actions. As Karen's construction neared completion, I could feel the final moments were drawing near. A strange calmness enveloped me as I stood watching the workers busily finishing the last details of the villa complex. But inside me, every nerve was tense. How long had I waited for this moment? No more hesitation. My decision was made, and now it was time to act. I walked to the spot I had prepared, my hand brushing over the remote control in my pocket. The feeling of anticipation grew inside me as I pressed the button. Suddenly, the ground under the garden shook violently. A deafening roar filled the air, and the space seemed to tear apart. I stood still, my eyes fixed on my land as large pieces of concrete began to crack. Karen's villa slowly collapsed. Chunks of walls, roofs, and concrete blocks flew into the air and fell back down in chaos. The water and power systems were cut off, and within seconds, the blinding lights and loud noises of the construction site were completely gone, replaced by silence and darkness. The sound of water flowing from broken pipes, the clanging of metal, all created an indescribable scene of devastation. In the span of a brief moment, everything Karen had worked to build, the grand villas she thought would be her victory mark, was completely erased. A sense of satisfaction surged within me. I had done it. I had protected my rights, and now she could do nothing. All her efforts were reduced to a pile of rubble. I looked down at the land, seeing debris, broken bricks, and large concrete blocks scattered in the mess. That scene was a confirmation that no one could invade my property without facing consequences. A feeling of triumph filled my chest. Finally, she had to pay for her thoughtless actions. Just then, I heard hurried footsteps from behind. I turned around, and Karen rushed out from the direction of the villa, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic, staring at the wreckage in disbelief. I stood there, indifferent, my gaze calm as I looked at her, knowing nothing could change now. Karen panicked, voice trembling, shouting, "What have you done? Why do I have to endure this? Everything I built. You have no right to do this to me. I've invested so much time and money into it. Why?" I looked at her, unfazed, my voice echoing coldly like the winter wind. I, calmly, voice steady. "You can't deceive forever. This is my land. Do you think you can take everything without facing consequences? Now, you've received your punishment. This is the price you pay for this invasion." Karen stood frozen, her eyes full of confusion, unable to understand what was happening. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her lips moved as if to say something, but no words came out. Finally, a burst of anger erupted within her. Karen moved toward me, her face red with fury, her hands clenched into fists, as if she was about to charge at me. Karen, unable to believe her eyes, angry. "I'll sue you. You will pay for this. I won't let you get away with it. You can't do this to me without consequences." I looked at her unafraid, not an ounce of worry. I knew everything was over. Her project was completely ruined, and she could not take back what she had lost. I looked into her angry eyes, not retracting my words. I calmly, with a cold tone, "You can sue me, but you won't be able to do anything. You played a dangerous game, and now you've lost. You can't keep fooling me. Everything you've done will have consequences, and you've already received them." Karen stood there, saying nothing. Her face was full of disappointment, anger, and helplessness. She couldn't believe she had failed completely, couldn't believe the project she thought would bring her victory had collapsed like this. But I had finished, and she couldn't change anything. After the lawsuit went to court, the truth was finally exposed. Karen had nowhere to retreat, and the court issued a harsh verdict against her. Not only did she have to dismantle the entire illegal construction, but she also had to pay a huge sum to compensate for the damages she had caused me. The luxurious villas she had hoped would be the pinnacle of her victory were now nothing more than rubble. All her assets, from the resort to her houses, had to pay the price for her secretive and irresponsible actions. Not only that, she had to endure a severe penalty for violating someone else's property rights. The court declared that Karen's actions were not just an invasion, but also an abuse of power, deception, and a severe infringement on my rights. Karen had not only lost her land ownership, but was also held responsible for all the damage the illegal construction had caused to the surrounding neighborhood. Everything was over, and Karen's resort was now just a pile of rubble. Broken bricks, fallen tiles, empty swimming pools that no longer symbolized wealth, but were signs of a devastating failure. Karen had not only lost everything she had built, but she was also forced to return the land she had taken from me. But the losses weren't all. She had to pay a large sum of money, compensating for everything she had taken away, which made me feel that a part of justice had been served. Sometime later, I happened to run into Karen again. When she walked into the neighborhood, she was no longer the confident, arrogant woman she once was. Her steps were slow, her eyes were red, and her face was filled with exhaustion. No longer did she have the luxury car, nor the large house she once proudly owned. All that was left was a massive failure she could not deny. I was standing at the end of the alley, and I recognized her figure from afar. Karen walked slowly towards me, her eyes not daring to look directly at me. She lowered her head, walking with an expression of disappointment that she could not hide. I knew this was the moment for me to say everything I had been thinking all this time. Karen stood in front of me, her face full of discomfort, not daring to look up at me. She stood still, her hands hanging limply, as if she no longer had the strength to face me. There was no pride or arrogance in her eyes, only failure and shame. What she had done was now proven to be the biggest mistake of her life. I, calmly, with a steady voice, "You can't fool me forever. You thought you could take my property without paying the price, but now you've received the consequences. Never invade my land again." I looked at her with not an ounce of sympathy. What she had done was unforgivable. The price she had to pay was inevitable after everything she had caused. I couldn't help but feel satisfied to see her fail. Not only because I had defended my rights, but because Karen had to face the consequences for her actions. There was no way out for her now. I didn't say anything more. My words were enough, and all I needed was for her to feel the truth. Karen stood there, her eyes still not daring to look up, not daring to face me. She knew she had lost everything. In the end, she lowered her head and turned around, walking away, no longer with the arrogance she once had, only with a failure that could not be erased. And I, standing there, watched her walk away. The feeling of satisfaction swelled within me. Everything was over, and I had won. And so Karen left, leaving behind a lesson about rights and justice. She not only lost the project she had built, but she also had to face the serious consequences of her own actions. Her loss was not only material wealth, but also her dignity and the respect she once had. Karen's failure was not just due to a single event, but the result of a series of wrongdoings and unforgivable arrogance. She had thought she could abuse her power, take what wasn't hers without paying the price. But when faced with me, she realized that every wrongful action has a price to pay sooner or later. I proved that justice ultimately prevails. My rights were protected, and Karen's lesson will be a reminder not only to her, but to anyone who dares to infringe on someone else's rights. When Karen faded from sight, I stood still for a moment. There was no overwhelming satisfaction, just a sense of peace, because I knew I had done the right thing. In the end, what she had done was paid for, and I had protected what belonged to me. The ruins of the resort were not just the collapse of a physical structure, but the collapse of arrogance and abuse of power. From here on, this neighborhood would return to its peaceful state. The people living around here would no longer have to worry about their rights being infringed upon. And I, with what had happened, would always remember that justice is not always served immediately, but it will always find its way.